The legend of a decapitated horseman carrying his own head is one that crops up in numerous European storytelling traditions. From the Middle English of Gawain and the Green Knight, to the stories of the brothers Grimm. A dark folktale of a headless horseman, haunting the highways and byways of remote locations. The Dullahan is one of the most spectacular creatures in the Irish supernatural realm, and which is particularly active in the more remote parts of counties. This creature was a malevolent harbinger of death whose roots lie in Irish and Celtic mythology. Dullahans are headless beings, and wherever one stopped, a mortal was meant to die. Although in most popular notions, this headless horseman appeared as a masculine being, but other versions seem to portray the Dullahan as a female character, a lesser-known form of fairy that predicted death. Nevertheless, this entity is widely identified as a grim and fierce headless rider carrying news of impending death to anyone who saw him riding past. This folkloric figure is commonly portrayed as either a phantom who rode a black horse that had lost its own head, or elsewhere as riding a black carriage that was pulled by 6 black horses, ascribing him as the driver of the sinister death coach. It is said that these horses ride so quickly and ferociously that fire emanates from both their nostrils and their hooves as they strike the ground. The carriage that some believe he rides was adorned with funeral objects such as coffins, tombstones, wheels made of thigh bones, and candles inside skulls which light up the way. Such a demonic aspect indicating his evil intent to grab lives away from their families. He wears a long black cloak that flows behind him as he rides through the lands, and he is known to hold his severed head high into the sky, in search for the souls that he wanted to take. The head of the Dullahan has a terrible appearance, covered in rotting flesh that gives off a strong and disgusting smell. His mouth is split into a terrifying and hideous grin as he found joy in taking the lives of others. His terrible eyes are lit up with an evil fire wavering back and forth, which allow him to see across the countryside even during the darkest nights. The Dullahan is well known for his headless appearance, and there are many stories that suggest how he lost it. One of which he was a soldier in his previous life and had his head taken from him in battle. His roaming depicted as him searching for his lost head for all of eternity. However, some tales hint the fact that he has already retrieved it, but still rides with a darker purpose. Believed to be so bitter about his own death that he searches for other souls to take with him to the afterlife. This depiction of the mythological headless horseman is believed to have developed him as the embodiment of the ancient Celtic god, Crom, a fertility deity worshipped by a prehistoric king in Ireland long time ago, in an era when human sacrifices to the gods was conceived to be sacred rituals. The god demanded human lives to be sacrificed every year, and the most favored method of sacrifice being decapitation. But in the 6th century, his worship ended with the coming of Christianity to Ireland. These rituals were condemned, and as Christianity grew in popularity, they stopped altogether. But frustrated by the loss of his annual quota of souls, he still wandered the roads, calling the names of those doomed to die, and carrying his head under his arm. This was when the story of the Dullahan first became prevalent, as the Irish people believed that Crom Dubh took this physical form in order to continue on getting the sacrificial souls that he called for. Which earned him the name Far Dorocha, the tangible embodiment of death. The myth of the Dullahan has evolved from the human form of Crom Dubh into many different depictions of the headless horseman in various cultures. The Dullahan was said to appear after sunset on certain feast days, around the end of August or early September when the festival of Crom Dubh took place. No gates remained closed when he approached, as they burst wide open to let him through. Which is when people know to be wary of looking outside after the sun has gone down. As he made his way through towns and villages after dark, the people hid behind their curtains because if anyone were to look at him, they would inevitably be struck blind. The Dullahan made certain to lash out their eyes with a whip made from a human spine, or throwing a basin of blood into their eyes. Therefore, those daring to look ultimately paid the price of laying their sight upon the obscure coachman. The Dullahan spoke only once on a journey, and that was to say the name of the person whose life he desired to take. Once the horseman stated this name, that person's soul was called to death and there was no defying this call. Thus there was no way to escape or hide from him. When he stopped, he would call out the name of his victim and that person would immediately die. The only thing that can frighten the Dullahan were precious metals, which when thrown on the ground can cause him and his horses to suddenly stop in their path and turn around to flee or just disappear. Even a small amount of gold was enough to drive them off. During the period when the story of the Dullahan was most popular in Ireland, families were likely to possess artifact made of gold. As such, they were told to keep some close to hand, to frighten him away if he ever called upon their house. The Dullahan is recorded in Irish tradition as an omen that sometimes accompanies the Banshee, where he is depicted as driving the Coiste Bodhar, also referred to as the deaf or silent black coach, mounted by a coffin, and drawn by headless horses. But unlike the Banshee, the Dullahan does not pursue specific families and its call was meant to harvest a dying person's soul rather than a death warning. There are tales surrounding the Dullahan noted in late centuries, and scholars eventually came across the legend of the headless rider. Thomas Johnson Westropp made a reference in his book, A Folklore Survey of County Clare, where a number of stories relating to it are recorded.
On the night of December 11, 1876, a servant of the McNamaras was going for his rounds at Ennistimon. In the dark he heard the rumbling of wheels on the back avenue. And knowing from the hour and place that no mortal vehicle could be coming, he concluded that it was the death coach and ran on, opening the gates before it. He had just time to open the third gate and threw himself face down on the ground in fear, before he heard a coach go clanking past. It did not stop at the house but passed on and the sound died away. On the following day, Admiral Sir Burton McNamara died in London.
The most famous and lasting iteration of the Dullahan must be the Headless Horseman featured in The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, a Gothic story written by the American author Washington Irving. The horseman takes the form of a Hessian soldier slain during the American Revolutionary War and rose during the festival of Halloween in order to find it. Irving was an American citizen, whose parents originated from Cornwall, and the story was written while traveling in England. So it's fascinating to see how the Celtic origins of this tale are filtered through the history of the America back then. Like the Dullahan, the Coiste Bodhar has made some surprising appearances in more recent culture, the first of which, Darby O'Gill and the Little People, that has terrified generations with its depiction of that other Irish ghostly legend, the Banshee. In that movie franchise, the spectral figure of the Coiste Bodhar comes floating through the air to carry away Darby's daughter to the land of the dead. The sinister Dullahan was also found in a number of Germanic stories, such as the tales of the brothers Grimm. Speaking of a headless horseman who blows a horn to warn huntsmen not to ride, as death will befall them the next day. In modern times, the Dullahan has been popularized as an evil character in many novels, games and fantasy stories. As you may probably wonder about the reason why the Dullahan has his head severed from his shoulders. Well, it's probably because the gruesome process of beheading corpses has been considered to ensure that their spirits don't roam in the world of the living. In the Catholic perspective, there are stories depicting decapitated saints walking around while holding their heads, as a symbol of how they were executed. In other accounts, the early Celts believed that the soul was located in the head, so they slain their enemies to dehumanize them. A belief which somehow recalls the origins of another famous Irish horror creation, Bram Stoker's Dracula, where the practice of burying corpses with a stake through the heart was another measure to prevent the dead's unquiet spirits from wandering on earth. These headless phantoms were found elsewhere than in Ireland. In Norway, the heads of corpses were cut off to make their ghosts feeble, and came back into existence as Dullahans. The roots of Irish mythology have become interwoven with other cultures, creating new traditions and evolved into mythologies that forged a strong link between the past and the present. As the belief goes on, once it has come to earth, it can never return empty. Thus, once the death of an individual has been decided by a greater power, there is nothing mortals can do to prevent it. The Dullahan, the story of the headless rider who roams the lands of Ireland looking for the souls of those about to die, has become a standard of many horror tales of Irish folklore, and has grown so popular over time. In turn, the Headless Horseman became a key character used in the mythology of many other cultures, as well as in many modern horror stories. Therefore, the frightful legend of the Dullahan, one of the most represented Irish legends, will definitely continue to live on for many more years. This concludes for today's video. If you've enjoyed it, leave it a like, a comment and share around. Consider subscribing as well if you haven't already, it's highly appreciated. Let me know in the comments section below what other tales you want to hear about, and I will do my best to cover them for you. And as always, stay curious.